At Grandpa's funeral, I bet Dad's mistress will be there too. It's gonna be a mess. A few months after my divorce, an invitation to my father-in-law's funeral arrived. He had been very kind to me, and my twins adored him. Despite the divorce, I genuinely wanted to attend the funeral with my kids. But my ex-husband now has a mistress. Attending would mean facing both of them. Their past verbal abuses had left me traumatized, and I couldn't bring myself to decide to go. Ignoring my concerns, my usually gentle son showed a determined smile. "We'll go to your place, Mom. Don't worry, they'll be the ones to suffer." At that moment, I didn't realize what my son and daughter were planning to do at the funeral. Nor did I know that it would lead my ex-husband and his mistress to their downfall. My name is Yvonne. I live in a newly built house with my office worker husband, Tom, and our twins. My husband seems stressed from work. He always comes home in a bad mood. "Hey. Beer." "Oh, you want a beer first today? I'll go to buy it right now." "Huh? You're going to buy now?" He sighed deeply and glared at me. "You're always so inefficient. Seems like you'd be bad at your job." I bit my lip, holding back the words that rose to my throat. My husband scanned the living room and grumbled in a disgusted tone. "This place is a mess. The food's half-assed. Why did I even marry you?" I had returned from my part-time job an hour before my husband got home. Rushing to cook and do the housework, everything ended up half done. "You know, since you're not working, you could at least do the housework properly," my husband said, considering my part-time job as not really working. He spoke to me in a domineering tone when I stayed silent. "Well? Are you gonna answer?" "Yes," I forced out, feeling a piece of me wear away with each coerced agreement. Yet, I find happiness in my life. I have 2 children who turned 13 this year, twins, a boy and a girl. The boy is Harry, and the girl is Anna. They've grown up to be kind-hearted, taking after who knows. Harry is laid back and easygoing. He's not much for sports, but he excels in his studies. And often helps Anna with her homework. Anna is outspoken and lively, the complete opposite of Harry. She struggles with her studies but shines in sports. She's always been a brother's girl, and that hasn't changed even now that they're teenagers. They look very much alike, being twins, but it's easier to tell them apart now that Anna has started growing her hair out. Their good looks have made them quite popular at middle school. At home, the twins are very close. They play games together, study together, and sometimes help with the housework. They always look out for me. There was a time when they brought me hot milk and cookies after I came back from my part-time job. The milk was a bit too hot, but it was the thought that counted, blurring my vision with gratitude. The only time their smiles fade is when they have to face their father. He orders them around just as he does with me, demanding responses. They used to manage a yes during their elementary school years, but lately, they often remain silent. Because of this, the relationship between my husband and the twins has become even more strained. Hearing my husband's voice echoing through the house, the twins came into the living room with frowns on their faces. "Dad, stop yelling at Mom. Mom's doing her best every day." My husband doesn't like that the twins always take my side. "Shut up. Who do you think is feeding you with their money? Don't talk back to me," he yelled after berating the twins, then turned to me. "It's your fault they turned out to be such brats." "What are you talking about? They're good kids. Don't talk about your own children like that." "Wonder where we went wrong with raising them. It's all because you had twins, that's why our life is so hard. Reflect on that." It's okay for him to ridicule me. But I can't stand it when he says hurtful things about the children. I was about to argue back when the twins stopped me. "Mom, we're okay. It's useless talking to him. Don't worry about it." Without them, my spirit would have broken long ago. I feel as grateful as I am apologetic. If only I were stronger, neither I nor the children would be criticized by my husband. Our family might not be picture perfect, but thanks to my children, I've managed to live relatively peacefully. That peace was shattered when that woman showed up. One day, while I was working the cash register at the supermarket part-time, a flamboyantly dressed woman lined up at my register. When it was her turn, she tossed her items on the counter and smirked, staring at me. I felt her gaze but continued my work as usual. "That'll be $17. The woman didn't reach for her wallet, she just kept staring at me. I felt irritated and anxious under her unabashed gaze. Maybe my rushed makeup looked odd today. I tried to hide my face as much as possible and spoke in a low voice. "Excuse me, the total is..." I began, but the woman snorted and threw coins on the counter instead of the tray. As I gathered the scattered coins, she whispered to me, "Hey, old lady. I'm taking him." Confused, I squinted at her. She continued, "What? You don't know me? I'm your husband's mistress." Mistress? Was my husband having an affair? He says he can't see you as a woman anymore. Without waiting for the payment, the woman left. I barely remember what happened next. My mind went blank as I continued to work the register, and before I knew it, I was sitting on the sofa at home. I think the woman and I are only about 5 years apart in age. Yet, she looked much younger and more beautiful. It seemed she spent a lot of time and money on her makeup and clothes. In contrast, I only did the bare minimum for makeup and wore cheap clothes I bought on sale. Old lady, huh? It's no wonder I was called that. But knowing that didn't make it any less sad or frustrating, and I couldn't stop the tears. I've been married for 15 years. My husband has never once helped with the housework. The first 2 months after the twins were born were tough. Just when one would fall asleep, the other would start crying, and eventually, both would be awake again. Initially, I tried to put them to sleep in the bedroom, but my husband, angry about not being able to sleep, kicked us out. Eventually, I ended up struggling to put the kids to sleep in the storage room, the farthest from our bedroom. Bathing them and soothing the fussy twins was my job. My husband pretended not to notice, absorbed in his newspaper with the TV on in the background. As the twins grew, things got a bit easier, but life was far from easy. 2 years ago, when my daughter was hospitalized for appendicitis, my husband didn't visit, claiming he was too busy with work. One weekend, as I was leaving my son with my husband to go to the hospital, my husband stopped me. "You forgot something," he said, making my son hold my hand. I remember it vividly. We're still paying off our mortgage, so money is tight. I've always prioritized my husband and twins' needs over my own, hoping not to burden them. I almost resigned myself to letting myself go before shaking the thought off. Can't make excuses. Can't blame others. After all, I didn't even know if what the woman said was true. I needed to get that straight first. My husband came home a while later. Dinner. The shock of the day's events had made me completely forget about making dinner. When I told him it wasn't ready, his face contorted with anger, and he hurled insults like lazy and useless at me. I remained silent, and my husband, as usual, urged me to respond. Normally, I would just say yes to whatever he demanded, but today was different. Today, someone who claims to be your mistress came by. Seeing the panic in his eyes confirmed it for me. Maybe he was with her even when I was caring for our daughter in the hospital. The late nights he claimed were for work might have been spent with her. I've endured so much for my husband and children. I really want to take care of myself, do my makeup properly. I want to wear nice clothes. I want to eat out occasionally, not worrying about the dishes. I want to go out alone and chat with friends at a cafe. I haven't done any of that since getting married. Until today, I thought it was okay. My hands trembled with anger. I was betrayed by my husband. He and his mistress were mocking my struggles and sacrifices. I contained my anger and told my husband about what his mistress had said. He tried to laugh it off, but when I mentioned the mistress claimed she was taking him from me, his smile twisted. "She's a better woman than you, isn't she? What kind of response is that? So, is everything she said true? Yes. It's your fault for being like that. He blamed me, as if he had won some prize. Knowing his mistress was serious about him, he must have been thrilled inside. As if I were disposable, he confessed things he had hidden until now. Indeed, his late returns weren't because of overtime. When I asked how he met his mistress, at a bar, he replied. Given her flashy appearance, I had suspected she belonged to the nightlife, but the man I knew wasn't supposed to frequent such places. Maybe, the man I knew never existed. He had been hiding his true self all along. A bar? Where did you get that kind of money? Shut up. It's my money, I can spend it however I want. He snapped, throwing his bag aside and storming out of the house. When I asked where he was going, he boldly said he was heading to the bar. That day, my husband didn't come home. He returned early in the morning but left for work without speaking to me. Since then, we hardly talked. Even after learning the truth, I didn't know what to do and continued with my daily routine as before. Naturally, the thought of divorce crossed my mind, but after much consideration, my desire not to burden the twins outweighed everything else, and I ended up doing nothing. Since then, my husband stopped hiding his affair. He even called his mistress in front of the kids. I was at a loss for words. While doing the dishes, I ran to him and grabbed his smartphone with my wet hands. I condemned his actions with contempt. However, he snatched back his phone and continued his conversation with his mistress as if nothing had happened. I sent the kids out of the living room and apologized to them in tears. Why would he hurt the children too? What did they do? Please, just leave me alone. My wish was ignored, and his behavior didn't change. A month later, he smugly presented me with a piece of paper. I'm going on a trip with her. Sign this while I'm gone. See ya, he said, then left for a 7-day trip with his mistress. What he left behind was a divorce form with his signature. Stunned, I was caught off guard when the twins came running, having heard the commotion. It was too late to hide it. Realizing what it was, the twins nodded to each other, snatched the divorce form from me, and insisted strongly. Mom, sign this. But doing this will cause trouble for you. Despite my concerns, the twins smiled warmly. We want you to sign it. We don't want to see you suffer anymore. A week later, my husband returned home with his mistress. She sat on the sofa as if she owned the place, smirking at my husband and me. My husband checked the divorce papers for my signature and smiled with satisfaction. Oh, you signed it properly. Good, now you can leave. I couldn't believe my ears. He had brought his mistress home and was now ordering us to leave immediately. I never thought he would go this far. I suggested we at least have a discussion about what to do next, but he insisted there was nothing to talk about. Without any discussion, what was he planning to do about the division of assets or child support? He yelled at me with an exasperated look when I persisted. This is my house. You and the kids have no place here. I've already called the movers, so start packing. All I could do was watch the scene unfold in disbelief. Was this some kind of bad dream? Why were the twins' belongings being packed into boxes while the mistress's things were being unpacked? Snapped back to reality by her loud laughter, I begged my husband not to do this. Please don't do this. Think about the kids, at least. Wait until we find somewhere else to live. But my husband and his mistress just laughed at me. I begged to at least let the children stay for a while. But the mistress and my husband were cold. The mistress said coldly they could hire me as a maid if needed, but the kids were just a nuisance and needed to leave immediately. My husband kicked a box filled with my son's things and told me to be grateful that he even called movers. Unable to bear it any longer, my daughter and son said, "Mom, let's go," and pulled me away. Along with the movers, my twins and I were forced out of the house. Led by the twins, we left our home. I looked back one last time at the house that used to be our dream home. I had been involved in every step of its design and construction. Now, the mistress sat there as if it was hers all along. We moved into my late grandfather's house, located on the same property as my childhood home. Soon after, my divorce from Tom was finalized with ease. Abandoned by Tom, I returned to my parents' house with the twins. Upon hearing our situation, my family offered us an empty house on their property. This empty house, where my grandfather, who passed away 8 years ago, used to live. It had become rundown from lack of care. My father apologized for its poor condition, but to us, having a place to stay, no matter how shabby, was a blessing. Living in a dilapidated house made me feel miserable. But the support from my family and children kept me going. 6 months after the divorce, we received a letter in the mail. It was an invitation to a funeral. The twins read it and hung their heads. "Grandpa passed away. It's so sad." Although my father-in-law had become a stranger to me, he was still the twins' biological grandfather. He had been ill and hospitalized for several years. The last time we visited, he seemed reasonably healthy. Perhaps his condition had suddenly worsened. My son, who was very fond of his grandfather, was devastated. My hands trembled as I held the invitation. I wanted to take the children to their grandfather's funeral. But I hesitated, worrying about what Tom would say if we attended. And if his mistress was there, it could lead to even more trouble. In the end, I couldn't decide whether to go to the funeral or not. On the day of the funeral, the twins approached me. Dressed in their uniforms, even though it was their day off. I realized then that they intended to go to the funeral. "Can we go to Grandpa's funeral?" "But, your father and that woman will be there. They'll surely say something terrible to us." Unconcerned, my son gave a determined smile. "It's okay. They'll be the ones to regret it." Confused, I frowned. My daughter hugged me tightly. "Mom, you don't have to go. We'll go to the funeral for you." "We'll tell them the truth," they said, and the twins left the house alone. I couldn't let them go by themselves. I quickly changed into my clothes and headed for the funeral home. Arriving at the funeral home, I hesitated to enter. I didn't know what Tom and his mistress would say if they found me. Maybe I'd be publicly scorned. But I couldn't leave my children alone with Tom. Taking a deep breath, I made my way to the venue with trembling legs. Tom was easy to spot. He behaved solemnly next to his mother. A stark contrast to his usual self. He noticed me immediately. His somber face vanished, replaced by a glare as if he had seen a ghost. He opened his mouth to say something but seemed to be reprimanded by his mother and bit his lip, saying nothing. It looked like the disaster I had anticipated wouldn't happen. At least not during the funeral. I sat down next to my son. The twins seemed surprised to see me, but also sighed in relief. They must have been feeling anxious too. The funeral proceeded smoothly, and during the ceremony, a video message prepared by my father-in-law was played. It seemed to have been recorded in a hospital room. In the background, white walls and medical equipment were visible. My father-in-law's complexion wasn't great, but he wore a gentle smile. He sent a message to relatives and friends, saying thank you for everything. The twins were wiping away tears in the audience. I was struggling to hold back my sobs. "There's something important I want to tell everyone here," he said after a pause. "I've decided to entrust my estate to my grandchildren, Harry and Anna." Tom and his mistress, who had been whispering to each other disinterestedly, turned their attention to the video for the first time. Tom was flustered, forgetting the people around him. "Wait a minute. What's this all about?" Despite being practically spat on, his mother remained calm. "Just as your father said. Be quiet." Tom, noticing the cold stares from the other attendees, seemed to hold himself back. The funeral continued smoothly, and my father-in-law was properly cremated. It was a relief that the twins and I could properly say goodbye. However, after the guests had left, the funeral hall was filled with Tom's angry shouts. The only ones left in the empty hall were Tom and his mistress, his mother, the twins, myself, and a few funeral staff members. "What was that video about? That's invalid. It's written in the will just like that." Tom was shocked. "Mom, you're on my side, aren't you? You can't possibly agree with this?" His mother snorted and firmly denied. "Agree or not, your father and I decided together. Nothing is left for you and that person there," she said, looking towards Tom's loudly complaining mistress. Then, his mother went on to tell Tom about that. How the twins and I continued to visit my father-in-law in the hospital after the divorce and how we worried about her living alone, visiting the family home. In contrast, Tom never visited his father and only showed up at the family home to borrow money. Moreover, in front of his mother, Tom and his mistress talked about buying a luxury car with my father-in-law's inheritance. "After all the disrespect you've shown, it's only natural you wouldn't receive any inheritance." "What do you mean? This isn't right." Despite being in public, his mistress screamed at Tom and threw her bag on the floor. Not satisfied, she grabbed anything nearby and started throwing it at the floor, Tom, and even his mother. The chaos escalated to the point where I had to intervene. Tom, driven by anger, yelled at me. "What are you doing here? You're a stranger now. This has nothing to do with you. Get out." He raised his fist in anger. I was paralyzed with fear when his mother embraced me protectively. "Stop it. She's like a daughter to me." Her intervention only fueled Tom's rage. He glared at me and shouted, "It's your fault for having these kids. Why did you have them?" His mother's defense of me shifted Tom's focus to the twins. The vile words he uttered were so shocking, I couldn't comprehend them immediately. Instinctively, I hugged the twins and covered their ears. "How can you say such things in front of them? They're my precious kids. You had them out of selfishness. I never wanted them from the start." Unbelievable. How could he say such things in front of his own children? Was this why he was unsupportive of parenting? Not just towards me but harsh towards the children as well? I couldn't stand the thought of him causing the twins any more pain. Forgetting my earlier hesitation, I stood in front of the children to protect them. That's when my father and brother appeared at the venue. They approached Tom, who was still hurling insults at me and Tom's mother. "Why don't you pay that money back then? Why were my father and brother here?" Confused, the twins whispered to me. "I called them. We thought we needed backup." It seems the twins were informed by Tom's mother about the will in advance. They considered the possibility that Tom could harm me or Tom's mother after learning the truth, so they called for help. "What are you talking about?" Tom feigned ignorance, but my father and brother relentlessly confronted him with his past misdeeds. There was a time when Tom was unemployed. It was about 5 years into our marriage. When I discussed it with my father, he offered Tom a job in accounting at his construction company. However, Tom felt humiliated being bossed around by my brother, who was his supervisor, and quit after just a few months. During that brief employment, Tom embezzled funds. Although it was a small amount, it was certainly not something to be overlooked. Yet, my father chose to overlook it because we were family. That's not all. I paid for the down payment on our house. If you intend to keep living there, I demand immediate repayment," my brother added, stepping forward with a voice shaking with anger. The construction costs were also reduced for family. The design of the house was entrusted to my brother, an architect. He, always doting on me, insisted on not being petty over such a joyous occasion and didn't charge for his design services. Overlooking the embezzlement and building the house at a significantly reduced cost were all for the sake of me and the person I was to marry. After the divorce, my father and brother had mentioned these matters several times. I had calmed them down, saying not to make a claim. But after Tom said such things to my children, I couldn't find it in me to defend him anymore. "You ungrateful wretch! You don't have any leniency from us," he said, as they walked away from Tom and spoke kindly to the twins, who behaved bravely. My son, unfazed, spoke to Tom. "Dad, I'm sorry about the inheritance. Honestly, we would like to refuse it." Tom's eyes sparkled with a sliver of hope. Harry, what an understanding child you are." As he began to say, my son interrupted him with a smile. "There's no need to hold back against someone who made Mom suffer. We'll gratefully accept it." Ignoring Tom, who was red-faced and screaming, my daughter spoke to Tom's mother. "Grandma, can we come over to your house to play again?" "Of course, you can come over anytime. I've cut ties with that foolish son," Tom's mother assured warmly, then turned to me, "You should come too." The pleasant atmosphere was abruptly cut by the mistress's shrill voice. "What about my luxury car? You have the money, don't you? Even without the inheritance, you should buy it for me." "Well, that's a bit. You can't buy it. Liar." It seems Tom had lied to his mistress about being wealthy. Either she was completely fooled by our somewhat impressive home, or he had been splurging at the bar, making it seem like he had money. Either way, it was pitiful. "If you don't have the money, I wouldn't bother with someone like you." My son poked the mistress's shoulder. "What do you want?" she snapped back, not intimidating him. "I heard from a friend, you worked at a daycare, right?" Her face turned pale instantly. The twins attend a public middle school, and rumors about the mistress had been spreading among them. "There's a rumor about an old lady who tries to seduce dads at the daycare. That's you, right?" "Old lady? Me?" "Yes. I heard about a flashy lady with thick makeup, so I thought it must be you." Stunned by being called an old lady, the mistress was speechless. "Our dad just happened to fall for your trap, but you would have taken any rich guy, right?" It seemed that being called an old lady shocked the mistress more than Tom revealing the truth. "Yes, that's right. I would have made anyone rich," she shouted hysterically, pointing at Tom. "But this guy, he doesn't have any money. Oh, this is the worst. I need to find someone new quickly." With that, she stormed out of the venue without looking back, her breaths heavy with frustration. Tom, who believed he had true love, made a pitiful face and chased after the mistress but soon returned alone. It looked like he was easily discarded. Tom, having abandoned his family, discarded by his mistress, and cut ties by his own parents. He seemed to finally realize his mistakes. He collapsed to the floor, crying like a child. Then clung to me, calling my name for the first time in decades. "Yvonne! I've been terrible. Really terrible. Can we start over?" When I shook off his hand, he then clung to the twins. "You'll miss your dad, won't you? Let's live together again, okay?" The twins deftly avoided him and said politely, "We're sorry, but we decline. We can't forgive you." Even when Tom begged his mother for reconciliation, she coldly dismissed him. Leaving Tom in a daze, we left the funeral home. Afterwards, Tom had to give up our family home. All that was left for Tom was a significant amount of debt. It seems that during his time with his extravagant mistress, he had accumulated debts. He had been counting on his father's inheritance, but that fell through. On top of that, he now had to deal with child support for the twins, mortgage repayments on the family home, and repayment of the embezzled funds. It was inevitable that he could no longer maintain the family home. Although that house held sentimental value for me, I harbored no attachment to a home that the mistress had invaded. The inheritance from my father-in-law for the twins was successfully processed with me as their guardian. Now, supported by my warm and loving family, I'm working full-time and thriving. With a bit more financial flexibility, we've started going out for meals once a week. It's not much, but the kids really enjoy it. My current goal is to renovate the rundown house we're living in. My son wants a stylish room, while my daughter prefers a cozy style. I'm still undecided, but we have time to think it over slowly.